Welcome to Washington Watch with Congressman Walter Jones. Each month, we take a look at the events happening in Washington, D.C. and how they affect our lives here in eastern North Carolina.
Beautiful little horse. It is God's gift to the world. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you for...
And now, here's your Congressman, Walter Jones.
Welcome to the July edition of Washington Watch. Today's guest is Jordan Sekulow, the Executive Director for the American Center for Law and Justice. The ACLJ, founded by Jordan's father, Jay Sekulow, is an organization dedicated to protect religious and constitutional freedom. Jordan is a syndicated radio host and a popular legal analyst on national news programs. He is a graduate of Regent University Law School and earned a Master's of Law degree in International Human Rights at Georgetown University. Jordan and his wife, Anna, have been married since 2011. I am so pleased to have Jordan on the show this week because he and his family have done so much to protect religious freedom in America. Jordan, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Congressman Jones. Thank you.
Jordan, you and your father and I started back in 2005 with an issue that would protect the rights of all of our chaplains, but especially those of the Christian faith who would like to, outside the church on base, to close a prayer as they see fit, and if they believe that they should close a prayer in the name of Jesus Christ, they can do so without any intimidation. Right. You and your family have been a strong advocate of this language.
And what we hear right there, Congressman, I think for people listening, for your constituents to know how hard you fought on this issue, both for them and for the whole country and for a lot of military chaplains. You know, this is a national issue and it involves so many people. And it's shocking. I think if people haven't heard it before, they're getting a refresher on it right now, the idea that they have chaplains of all these different denominations and that's legal. And the Supreme Court's been very clear, you know, with legislative prayer out in Nebraska is where that started, the House, the Senate. Chaplains are part of the American experience when it comes to these different parts of government. The idea that that's okay, but they can't end the prayer the way they want to by the dictates of their faith. They're not only part of the military, they are ordained. I mean, this is a unique part of the government that, again, constitutionally protected, but there has now been this push, which we know, this may not have been as controversial of an issue because in the past the military did not have people stepping in to tell these chaplains to stop, or the executive branch stepping in. We've had Veterans Affairs, stepping in at funerals. These are times when chaplains are being asked to do something and then told, but you can't do this. And of course, if someone did not want a specific chaplain at their personal or family event, that's fine. They have that decision to make. But if you're going to have a chaplain there, you know who that chaplain's nomination is, why are we going to limit their ability to at least express their faith?
Well, Jordan, that point is well made because we have said, those who support this language, is that we're not saying that a chaplain should close a prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Sometimes they might not want to do so.
Right.
But if their heart and their heart is based on their love of Christ in their life, and they really believe that at this particular prayer that they do want to close the prayer in recognizing Jesus Christ as our Savior, they should be able to do so. So we've got the language in the House bill. I want to thank my chairman and the ranking member, as a matter of fact, that the language is in the House bill. We go to the floor this week, shortly after this interview, and hopefully it will stay in, and then we got to see if we can find some friends in the Senate. Right. And I know with your help and Jay's help, we will find those friends. Another thing, your organization, y'all have gone all the way to the Supreme Court, fighting for religious freedom in America. Sure. Would you give an example of one or two of the cases that come to your mind?
Sure. I mean, most recently would have been the protection of the Ten Commandments. A small town in Utah had accepted a memorial, and when the local governments accept something, it becomes theirs, their property. And there was a group, which was this 30-member religious organization that, was dwindling in size. But they're challenging all of the monuments across the country by saying, well, if you accept the Ten Commandments monument in the town, you've got to accept our monument. And this made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, think about the implications if that was true. Central Park accepts all these monuments. They have to accept everyone's monument. Does the Statue of Liberty, Liberty Park, have to accept the Statue of Tyranny, which, again, was cited in the eventual Supreme Court opinion. But the city did not win at the Court of Appeals, the 10th Circuit. They had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. We defended the city. We ended up winning. And this is why it's important. 9-0. Saying that the government has a choice when they're speaking. It's not a establishment clause violation. They don't have to accept everybody's monument. Now, the original cases were really fighting back on the erosion of just the entire First Amendment when it comes to religion. The fact was that the government had started treating religious speech differently. And the First Amendment doesn't say freedom of speech that's not religious, and then there's freedom of religion. It's just freedom of speech. So the ACLJ started, because of this pushback in the 60s and 70s, by saying, wait, even if the freedom of exercise of religion, which was pretty much eviscerated by the Supreme Court, is not as a winning of an argument, why are we not just looking at this as speech? Why is it different for the Christian or the Krishna who's on the street corner? Then the political group, who you're absolutely protecting their right, or labor union, and that was a winning argument at the court. So it started there, and then it progresses to the more complex issues like government speech and the monuments. This is not a fight that's ever over. No, but we started pushing back, and it's getting more nuanced, which is a good thing, because that means the bigger picture issues. These groups were unchallenged. ACLU, Americans Unite for Separation of Church and State, the atheist groups now that we're seeing, they were basically unchallenged for decades, and now they're being challenged in court, and that we provide these services for these towns, our legal services, at no cost.
Well, Jordan, you and your father have done God's will out here, because this country can never forget that it was founded on Judeo-Christian values, and if we do not maintain those values, this country will crumble and fall, and we don't want to see that happen. And so the fight that y'all have taken on, so many fights as a matter of fact, and it's great to know that you've been to the Supreme Court and you won 9-0. I mean, that's quite a victory. There's no question about it. That brings me to the issue of the IRS and whether they did or did not try to pick and choose who they were going to give tax status to, beneficially speaking. That also brings me to the issue that you have helped us with for many years, and that is the repeal of the Johnson Amendment. Right. My hope is that as Chairman Camp and the Ways and Means Committee really starts looking into whether violations were done or not, that we can encourage him to also look at the area of houses of worship and how they are impacted by the Internal Revenue Service. So I know you're very familiar with the issue involving what the IRS has been trying to do, but I think they're out of control, quite frankly.
And I don't think, Congressman Jones, there's a better time to be talking about repealing the Johnson Amendment than right now, because people are, and your constituents know, people that are just paying attention understand, even if they weren't a Tea Party person and they weren't an organizer, the fact that the IRS has very broad discretion even when they're not violating their own policies. And so when it comes to religious groups, which have also been, religious conservative groups, pro-Israel groups that have been put into this mix, that they are intentionally, we call it chilling speech, which is a constitutional violation. What does that mean? It means none of these groups, they didn't get denials. So they didn't get an answer. So you're put on hold almost indefinitely. And the IRS is saying, how long will you wait? And or will you be scared when you get this letter, which a lot of groups are. We represent 25 right now. We filed a lawsuit against the IRS in the D.C. court here. But another 100 or so have contacted us, people who got the letters from Lois Lerner, signed sometimes, and these other officials that keep resigning and retiring as we speak, and from D.C., not just Cincinnati. And you look at these letters, you say, okay, it's a IRS employee in Cincinnati trying to do their job and pay their bills and pay their family's bills and get to work. There's no way that they came up with this complex questioning. We have to remember, Lois Lerner, the head of this division, was the head of the FEC's enforcement division when they went after the Christian Coalition.
Right.
She is the director of that force that started asking about the content of prayers. Here we were just talking about a prayer issue. I mean, this is someone who has got a record of distaste for conservatives, Christians, people of faith. I mean, to the point where that happened again in the Tea Party cases. Who was opening these prayers and what was the content of them? Some of these groups got. This is a long track record. So the idea that when you get to the Johnson Amendment, for instance, a law done as kind of political retribution by then Senator Johnson in the 1950s against two groups he didn't like that came against him in Texas to kind of keep 501c3s out of politics completely.
Right.
Also keeps churches out completely. But it's this discretion the IRS has. When will they file? What is too much? They have this coded language application now. I mean, in the past, it was troubling and it was wrong. Now we know just how misused that can be. And it has the same impact. It silences speech. Because, oh, wait, if I say the word conservative, if I talk about spending, if I talk about national security, is the IRS possibly going to see my church as using coded words, and we're going to lose our taxes status retroactively, so that we'll owe taxes on everything we've taken in? I mean, that is the chilling speech as well. We can't trust the IRS with these kind of the kind of ability to just target when they want to. They don't go after everyone. They can't. And in the past, they've actually, not really enforced this. It's because they don't have to. It's scared everyone from even getting involved in issues, which it doesn't ban, but it's because that code language. I mean, you think about if you're a pastor of a big church, and I want to make clear to everybody, there'll be plenty of pastors who feel like that's not their job to do this.
Certainly.
And that's what America's about. You know what? I mean, that's what America's about. If your pastor doesn't feel like that's your job, go with that. Don't feel it's not like we're saying again, like we were talking about today. You don't have to end your prayer as the dictates of your faith at every prayer opportunity for a chaplain. That law would not require that. Repealing this would not require churches to get involved, and you can't spend money. This is not the FEC provision.
Right.
This is minimal. Every once in a while, feeling like we've got to weigh in on an issue, and then of course church members can decide if they want to keep attending or tell the pastor knock it off. That's what America's always respected: church sovereignty.
Well, Jordan, the points you made, a number of points, and you're exactly right on target. I'll tell you something that's kind of interesting. A week or so ago, I was walking back with Adam Schiff, who's a Democrat from the state of Washington, and he reminded me that here at conservative Walter Jones and more liberal Adam Schiff had signed a letter together asking the Internal Revenue Service why they were making an inquiry in a Episcopal church in his district. Yeah. This happened to be the church where the priest, I guess, during the election of George Bush and John Kerry was his opponent, the Episcopal priest actually said that George Bush and John Kerry are both wrong on the war in Iraq, that Christ was a man of love. And what happened was no one within the church complained about the sermon, but outside, when this was written up in the L.A. Times, someone who read the article filed the complaint with the Internal Revenue Service. You remember the case?
Yeah, sure. And people report you. And this the idea. And so you have groups, this is their reason for existence. Americans have separation of church and state. And it's not just a conservative issue or a liberal issue. It's in fact, because these groups who are more left-leaning are so, I guess they know that criticism could be there if they were only targeting, Republican-leaning red state pastors, put that way, and priests, that they always throw in with their complaint process, some on the other side. But there should have been no investigation at all. If this was a pastor who came out and said, you know what, there's not really good options here, and it was really about the war.
Right.
Right. And the idea that the reason why churches get the status is not just because of the spiritual side in America.
Certainly.
But it's the service they provide to the community. You go to your pastor for information. They're supposed to be someone who you can trust and rely on, and you want their opinion. This limits that, while at the same time, there are, unless you're at a point where you are I'd say one of the well-known pastors of the time, where you can, come out but then disclose that it wasn't, the church doing it, That's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about pastor to congregants just talking about the issues of the day, and yet they're being harassed by the IRS. It's again, that's why I say, I mean, it can't be a better time for both sides to say, you know what, this is when you start pulling back, because this is something we can do quickly. People are talking about abolish the IRS, but this is things we can do immediately. Take this power away from the IRS, take the discretion away, and this has nothing to do with flooding money into politics. No. Churches cannot donate to campaigns.
Well, Jordan, the point that you've made is exactly on target for this reason. Prior to the Johnson Amendment of 1954, any 501c3 had no restriction, especially in the area of speech. Sure. As you made reference to the history of it, Johnson was going after the Hunt family and a couple other groups that were opposed to his reelection to the Senate.
Right.
And when that amendment by Johnson had been introduced in the Senate, it was never debated. No. The Republican majority accepted it unanimous consent, that they accepted the amendment with no debate, and it's created more and more problems. And again, this is something that ACLJ would help us with. I think that the time is right. You've just said that, to reach out to the Republican leadership in the House and ask them to put an amendment that would just repeal the Johnson Amendment. And a lot of the 501c3s are somewhat liberal in views.
Sure.
So everybody gets the freedom returned.
And that's, here, American Center for Law and Justice, we're a 501c3. We, in some groups like us, also have a C4 side to get more involved. We don't. That being said, we have to be extremely careful. We would still be just as careful, because our goal is to represent our clients. We'll work with members of Congress, like you were talking about, working with Democrats, working across the aisle. Of course. I mean, that's what our members support us so that we can help get things done or go to court. And we don't ask our clients, what their political position is. And we have some clients that has nothing to do with the Tea Party IRS cases that are religious liberty, and they could be liberals, they could be independent, they could be not involved. But the idea that everyone would be free of this restriction on the speech side, without saying that 501c3s become C4s, the controversy. Right. No, absolutely not. We're talking actual speech here. And I think it is important to point out to everybody in your district who's watching right now, and everybody who sees this interview, that it helps every 501c3. You may not be a political 501c3, religious or anything, but there may be an issue that comes up that's going to affect your group directly. Why should you have to go and create another entity, or risk your tax exempt status for speaking out on it? That time it comes up. This gives you that ability. It's not that you can't be 100% political 501c3, and that's not what the repeal legislation does. It's just to make it clear that when you feel like you need to get involved, you can.
Well, Jordan, again, I think the environment is right. I look forward after this interview to talking with you by telephone and see if we can continue to grow the numbers, because again, I thought it was very interesting that Adam Schiff, who's a very intelligent young man, he's a lawyer and he is liberal, but he came to me and said we need to talk about this issue.
Exactly.
So we're going to get together sometime in the next few weeks, and I pulled the letter to see what we had written. But Jordan, again, we got just a couple of minutes left.
Sure.
You and the American Center for Law and Justice, y'all have done so much good work. I want to say God's work, quite frankly, because whether you be religious or not religious, freedom should be for all.
Right.
And too many times the people of faith are the ones that seem to be getting attacked, and that's why, again, the issue dealing with the chaplains, to use a baseball analogy, we've finally gotten on first base. We're headed towards second, but we got to get to third and home plate before it's a done deal. Would you have a comment or two before we close?
Absolutely. The first is that, like you just said, Congressman Jones, and we rely, members of Congress like you, who can be champions here to put together your colleagues to keep pushing on these issues, because there is pushback. People may say, well, why would anybody oppose this? They do. They do in the branches of government, even some in the military, because they want their own full control. But it's Congress and it's the people's representatives who get to decide. And then I would add to that victories for speech, victories for religious speech are victories for everybody. It's if you win a case for a Christian pastor, it's not just, well, Christians now have this right. It's everyone has this right now who's religious. If you win a free speech case, it's not, well, just the IRS Tea Party, the Tea Party groups, 501c4s have this right. It's all 501c4s. It's everybody who wants to apply. And the idea that it doesn't ever need to be partisan, that we should all be able to just exercise our rights, that's how you have the most free and fair debate. And that's what we're about, whether it comes to sharing faith or sharing political views.
Jordan, I want to thank you, the American Center for Law and Justice, for being on the show today. And Glenn Downs, my Chief of Staff, will join us for the next segment. I hope you'll continue to watch. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you, Congressman.
Welcome to the second part of the July edition of Washington Watch. I'm delighted to have my Chief of Staff, Glenn Downs, to join me. It's been quite a few months, and Glenn, a lot of issues facing the American people, and certainly those of us in Congress.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me back here again, Congressman, and our time is short, so we've gotten a lot of feedback from people throughout eastern North Carolina, and one thing that people are interested in is just a kind of a quick update. It's been a while since we've been here. Yeah. This year, the last year ended, and this year began with one of the new budget deals, which raised taxes. How did you vote on that? Why did you vote the way that you voted?
Well, this was a fiscal cliff bill, and I was very disappointed that we only made cuts of approximately $60 billion when we had increases of over $140 billion, somewhere in those numbers, that we cannot continue to grow the government when we're borrowing the money from the Chinese to pay for the growth of government, which means more spending. So I was among 66 Republicans who voted no on that bill that you're making reference to.
The next thing that kicked in, if you recall, earlier this year, and it's still an ongoing thing, was the automatic spending cuts that are generally referred to as sequestration. And a lot of people have questioned how the priorities have been set, that the dollar amounts that have been cut, while they've been large, have not been large relative to the total amount of federal spending. And it seems we've gotten calls and letters in your office from people wanting to know, well, gosh, why is the military laying off people, say, that work at, or furloughing people that work on airplanes at Cherry Point, but the admirals don't get furloughed? And
right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Glenn, I did not vote for the bill that created the sequestration. The reason for it is that I felt that Congress should meet their constitutional responsibility and have the strength to make these tough decisions, and they are tough decisions, there's no question about it. What sequestration did was to set up a mechanism that Congress does not have any say yes or say no. And this $10 billion over cuts are coming from the Department of Defense and from discretionary programs, and I have been very much publicly opposed to these automatic cuts because there is no control. There are many things that need to be cut in Washington, there's no question about it. And I would support those cuts if we would debate it and vote on it up or down like we're supposed to based on our constitutional responsibility, and not have automatic cuts.
Well, you have been in a minority that have had that position over time, and you have paid something of a political cost for it. The standard practice around here is to try to get among the leadership of both parties, is to get whoever's got the D or the R beside their name to sort of automatically vote for their strategy, not just their goal, but their strategy for getting to that goal. And can you talk a little bit about that process and how you've made your decisions relative to that?
Well, Glenn, I hope that I'm in tune with the majority of the people in the 3rd District. I said the majority. It's just like the war in Afghanistan. We're spending $8 billion a month. Just recently, it was in the New York Times that the CIA got caught giving tens of millions of dollars in cash for 10 years to Karzai. And the whole thing is that I just can't continue to speak out. I want to start fixing America's problems. I want to fix the problems of the 3rd District. I don't want to keep fixing problems around the world. If we get attacked, let's have a strong military. Let's rebuild our military and make it strong. And let's go after those who are trying to hurt the American people. But when you look at all the waste, fraud, and abuse in Afghanistan, we don't even hold any hearings, at least on the House side, about the waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't understand it.
Well, I want to ask you about national defense and the National Defense Authorization Act in just a second, but relative to what you just discussed about not making the tough decisions, just sort of keeping on with what we've been doing, or what the government's been doing we now seem to have reached a point an inflection point in history where you can't keep doing what you're doing. And how do your colleagues, you brought up spending money overseas and spending money in Afghanistan in particular, your colleagues who want to protect domestic military bases, for example, and at the same time continue to fund, say, giving money to Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, and not raise taxes, and not cut, and balance the budget. How do they reconcile that when you talk with them?
Glenn, they really can't. It's kind of an ongoing process that you made reference to it in your beginning of the question. It is a system that right now continues to think that we can borrow more and more money from foreign governments, including China. We can continue to do everything around the world, and there's going to be a collapse. I sincerely believe, economically speaking, we have not seen the bottom yet. I hope we have. I wish we had, but I don't think so, to be honest about it. And I think that the continued spending of the monies that we've borrowed from other countries just doesn't make any sense, at least to the people of the 3rd District. I get an applause and support every time I say it's time to fix the 3rd District's problems. It's time to fix the American people's problems and not the rest of the world.
Well, there's not much time left, and a lot of things I'd like to ask you about, but I'd like to hit on just a couple relative to, you're a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee. You just had a big National Defense Authorization Act passed. You had 7 different provisions, at least that I know of, that were specifically yours included in that bill. You mentioned the chaplain's provision with Jordan Sekulow, but you did 2 other things about quality of life. One is a commission to take care of service members coming out of the service to help them transition to the civilian life, and another was allowing them to give grants to nonprofits to help service members. Can you talk a little bit about the commitment?
Glenn, we got about 17 seconds, and what we'll do, let's try to pick those up in the August edition, because we need to talk about them. There were successes for the good of our military and the communities. And thank you so much for watching the July edition of Washington Watch. Please watch us in August. Thank you.